pollinators provide a service that in no way is captured either at a micro or a macroeconomic level. And it is only when you have no more pollinators left and you have to truck around your stock of bees on the back of a truck, as is done in California today, or you have to take the pollen by hand and apply it with brushes to plants, trees in order to have nature function, do you begin to attribute a cost of it, the opportunity cost of not having pollinators or the cost of labor and doing it mechanically or artificially. And this is one of the difficulties we have, that it takes us too long in our economic radar and lenses to measure and appreciate the value of nature to that which we describe as our economy, whether in GDP terms or otherwise. But I think it is also embedded in the visibility failure that we often attribute to those who may not matter so much in national economic statistics, and yet are highly dependent on functional nature and nature services. Again, Pawan's work at the time on GDP of the poor, where in research in India and many other parts of the world, we know this to be true. People who live in the rural economy, who depend on nature and agriculture and natural resources, for them, nature often represents 70, 80, 90% of their GDP, the GDP of the poor or of the rural dwellers. And yet, in the way that we manage, maintain, and sustain those resources is in no way reflected in either public policy, public budgets, or sustainable use measures. A second major failure that still holds us back, and I think it is important to bear that in mind, is a market failure that is best expressed in that phenomenon where the cost of the degradation of ecosystems, the cost of pollution, is essentially socialized, if at all, and the benefits of doing certain things and deriving a profit from them are often privatized. And in there lies one of the great tragedies of the 20th century and of the way that we industrialized and the way that we chose to develop, alongside extraordinary gains in wealth and progress and so on, not to be denied. But at the beginning of the 21st century, clearly the loss of nature, of species, of ecosystems, and of biodiversity, alongside the threat of climate change, clearly point to something that we have begun to address in many different jurisdictions, but still not adequately, I believe. And the third is really a related policy and regulatory failure, if you want. It's the failure of trying to, first of all, stop certain things that are simply not justifiable. I just have to adjust my camera. Sorry for a second. Sometimes it does this to me. In trying to deal with that issue, I think, you know, we have no problem stopping asbestos. We also legislate against slavery. You know, societies have a point in time when they take a decision and say, this is not who we are, this is not part of our future. And I think we do need to look at these financial markets and the scope with which they look at future investment pathways as part also of a regulatory outcome, not in the sense of micromanaging an economy, but reflecting a social consensus. Secondly, incentivizing. If we continue to subsidize hydrocarbons in terms of extraction and also use in the way we do, there simply is no way that you can afford to build a competitive incentivizing and subsidy economy alongside that. It clearly means a rebalancing, and I think that is critical to, again, addressing the opportunities for a scale up and an acceleration of investments in nature. And finally, the commitment of a policy strategy, a development strategy, an economic vision that is built on a transformational approach to markets. Markets are an opportunity for people to interact with one another, but we regulate them. We have always done, and we can also shape them. And I think the stories today, whether you take a Costa Rica 30-year journey of restoring forest cover, whether you take a Denmark that simply by public and sovereign decision decided to rebuild its energy economy around renewables, we could go on with this story. China's investments in renewables, India's solar investments right now. But ultimately, we depend on capital, we depend on finance, and we cannot build these parallel systems, because if the destruction continues while we're slowly building up a cleaner, greener, more sustainable economy, we are unlikely to succeed. So let me pick up on something that a number of you spoke to earlier on, and that is, we need to look at this in terms of a green economy transition. I think often we have a challenge in that it's been easier to relate climate finance, green finance to climate change because it's technology, it's more business and market compatible, And we now have a $300 trillion renewable energy economy. Grew out of nothing in less than 15 years. Nature has been, to some extent, the poor cousin in this because it's more complex, more distributed, but also because markets and regulations and also the economic incentives and visibility simply have not kept pace with what biology and science has been telling us. So herein lies, I think, a great opportunity in terms of a more joined up green economy view. 44 trillion of our annual GDP are in one way or another dependent on nature. More than half of the SDG targets are dependent on nature. More than 2.5 billion people depend every day directly on nature, and 1/3 of the climate mitigation solutions are directly dependent on nature. So it's not the absence of a rationale. It is more in the way that we are shaping markets, public policy, and creating the opportunities to scale up and invest. And I think here, back for a moment to COVID-19, we are seeing massive recovery packages being put in place. If we cannot thread into the DNA of a recovery and a development pathway of a country, that greening of the economy now, it will set us back for a decade or longer. It will miss enormous opportunities. It will entrench the economy of the normal of yesterday. And we all know that this is not going to be very helpful. And interesting enough, for the first time, in the midst of a also economic and financial crisis, it is financial markets who are articulating that perspective with a clarity and a forward-looking perspective that I have not seen in all these years. So extraordinary opportunity. We must focus on that, and we must weave that financing for nature into a larger green economy perspective. And the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Pathway, I think is critically important. I think Stephen spoke to it, others as well. Let us remember that the SDGs without a green economy will not happen. But a green economy without the SDGs will not happen either. Because, you know, markets have already, when they want to, and when in our very unequal world, the opportunity is there, valued and invested in nature. Just look at real estate next to Central Parks, next to Hyde Park, and you can see markets are perfectly capable of factoring in the value of nature. But look also at the fact that for years and years, we are witnessing the decimation of nature, the extinction of species, and yet nothing has happened. This is why I think we do have to have a more joined up approach. I think we do need to take COVID-19 as a critical moment in time while building the paradigm, the regulatory, the market incentive-driven approach to scaling up investments in nature. And I think there are plenty of opportunities. And in the way that I think I listened this morning also to financial institutions speaking about that opportunity, we are entering a next phase. But let's be very clear. We also see the temptation to go back, and it is often the shorter route, even if it is ultimately a dead end. And that is why UNDP, the United Nations as a whole, and we in our offer in helping countries to now design their responses in this crisis, have chosen alongside governance, social protection, and the digital disruption and innovation path, the green economy as one of the 4 central pillars on which to be of assistance to countries and communities moving forward. And without finance, without private finance, without financial markets being part of that equation, we will simply not succeed. So I'll stop here because I know time is short, but I hope it's kind of provided a perspective from a development, sustainable development vantage point, very conscious of the importance of recognizing the value of nature and looking for a green economy approach that is both value-driven and values-driven. I think it is in these two that we will see the greatest potential for both markets, the public, and our national governments to respond. Thanks, Cassie.